Welcome to the Strong Roots Podcast. It's all about interviewing everyday, ordinary Christians who have strong roots of faith and then applying it to our own lives. Whether you are seeking, whether you're new to faith, or maybe you've been following Jesus for a really long time, come grow strong roots with us.
Hey, Strong Roots. I'm here with Meagan, and she is the Hebron Life Group Coordinator. She has also been a faithful sisterhood leader, if you know her from sisterhood. But she's also a great friend, and she is here because we're going to be talking about the idol of marriage. Now, this is a big one, whether you're married or whether you want to be married. So I cannot wait to talk to you about this. So first question, Meagan, what have you believed about marriage that is not true?
Yes, this is a really good question. When you first asked me to do this podcast, I was like, where is this going? But when I really think about my life and I think about the whole decade of my 20s, I rooted my identity in marriage.
Yeah.
Like my life didn't start until I could meet someone to marry. So I feel like I spent maybe 10 years of my life just trying to find the person that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with.
And how many of us, even if it wasn't 10 years, I definitely did that for, 3-5 years. And it was just constantly, I was at Target, could that be my future husband?
Right.
Ooh, that guy at church, can I,
Right.
What a time-consuming waste in our mind of almost not trusting God's plan for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it skews anything that you do experience in your life because you try to connect it to that person or what it's going to look like. You're not like in the moment.
Yep.
So I always felt like my life was on pause.
Yes.
I wasn't really living, if that makes sense.
And isn't that sad? Because I often look back and think how much time I wasted not doing the things of God because I was so consumed with being married. And I love that you said it paused. But when God was really like, push, play, there's so much I want to do in and through you through this time.
Right. I felt like there was just many years of my life that God could have been using me. And I was like that roadblock
Yes,
of him using me. So.
absolutely. So what is the truth?
Right. So marriage is not a life goal. It's not a purpose in life. And I believe that it's not who you should root your identity in.
Yep.
And I feel like God tells us we should root our identity in him. Marriage is a gift.
Yep.
It's a gift from him that was created by him to offer emotional, physical support in everything that you go through in life.
Yep.
But it is not the purpose of life.
And doesn't God even say, like, it is better for you not to marry?
Right.
In our weakness, he provides this almost, he doesn't use the word crutch, but, but like here, because of those of you who are weak, you can get married. And obviously marriage is beautiful. It reflects, like marriages should reflect our relationship with Christ, like all these things. But truly, he says it is better to not be married.
Right.
So it's interesting that this is such an idol even in our Christian lives.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I feel like it's almost backwards. Like we have a backwards thinking, and I don't know if it's cultural or if it's just traditional or how we, were raised. But yeah, there definitely is that next step is marriage, right?
Yeah.
After we do school and whatever that looks like, as a young adult, marriage kind of is that next natural step for us.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you believe this lie, but I feel like I thought I'm defective. Like if I don't find somebody who loves me or wants it, like I almost put myself in this other category of like misfit. I don't know how, you know what I'm trying to say?
And I feel like it also breeds comparison because then you do look at the people who do meet that person that they're going to spend their life with early on in life.
Yeah.
And then you start to compare like, well, what's wrong with me? Like,
Yeah.
why am I not good enough to be married already or at least to have met somebody already that I want to share my life with?
And I think we can twist it and then turn it on God.
Oh,
Like, God, why aren't you answering my prayers? Like, I deserve this. I've been doing what you know?
right.
And this idol can not only hurt ourselves, but it hurts our relationship with God.
Right. And just to go in, emphasize the reason why that wasn't God's first choice for us, right?
Absolutely. So why is it so easy to make marriage an idol? Or maybe what is a common belief about marriage that you believe that doesn't line up with God's best?
I think for me, it was pretty easy because it's something I always dreamed of as a little girl. And I was always of the thinking that, okay, I have to be married and then I'm going to have kids. So like marriage was that first step to like the beginning of the rest of my life. So for me, it was the dreams of being a little girl and just constantly, I guess, maybe idolizing those dreams of wanting those dreams to come true, of being married and then starting my life as a mother and then doing all the other things that I wanted to do in my life.
So here's this idol we're talking about. Both of us probably still struggle with not putting it back on the shelf, like putting it in the place that God wants it. God only belongs, right? Like you've smashed this idol, but there's sometimes we want to resurrect them, right? And we're still fighting daily. We just want to throw that out there. But I want to ask, describe when you really were like, this doesn't offer life. Like, was there a moment where you're like, this is destructive?
Yeah, I really think there was. And I was in my later 20s and I had been in serious relationships, but they were coming back void. Like I hadn't met someone that I thought like, okay, this is the person for me. And I feel like God did me, God was with me because I also feel very strongly that I wanted to choose someone who knew Jesus and had a relationship with him. So the couple of relationships that I was in did not have that. Right. So for me, that was like a deal breaker.
Yep.
So I went through several years trying to find this person. And then I feel like after about 2 or 3 people, I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't even know if this person exists. Like, does this person exist? So I feel like at that point, and then I started making promises with myself to give it more to God, that I really realized that I wasn't idolizing it as much anymore. Because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. And it was something that I had maybe subconsciously not know at the time, but now know that I was relying on God with it at that point.
I love that. So for people who are listening who maybe aren't married, that desire is on their heart. What does it look like to actually, when you say surrender it to God, like what does that look like? What does that mean?
Well, I definitely think it has to start with rooting your identity in who God says you are.
Yep.
And you can't do that unless you know who God says you are, right?
Yep.
So it's most important that you get in his word, that you're spending time with him daily, that you're surrendering that part of your life to him. So that could look like prayer, that could look like meditating on, particular verses that really speak to you.
Yep.
But yeah, I definitely feel like building a relationship with God is the most important step into actually surrendering marriage.
Oh, absolutely. So maybe we touched on this, but what does God say about this topic? Do you want to expand on that at all, or do you feel like we already answered it?
Well, I do feel like what God says on idolizing marriage, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Most specifically, I feel like anything that we want to idol, God tells us not to do that. God tells us to turn towards him and surrender it to him and root our identity in him.
What does it mean to root our identity in Christ? I've heard you say it a couple times.
Yes. Right. It means to take what he says, and we find that out in the Bible, in Scripture, and to believe it.
Yes.
And then to give the worldly things up to him that we want to hang on to and surrender those to him.
Right. Why is it so hard sometimes?
I think, I know I always, and people who know me, they probably think I blame culture a lot, but I do. I feel like we live in a skewed culture, and everything that's around us is telling us the opposite. You know, it's telling us that, no, like you need to root your identity in how you look. You need to root your identity in who you marry and how much money you make, in what you do for a career, not, the person that's inside, not your heart.
Yep.
And we've talked about this before, God looks at our heart, and that's what's most important.
Absolutely. So for those of us who are married, what are signs that we are putting our marriage above God?
Yes, this is a good question too. All of them are.
Yeah.
But I think it's when we're looking to our spouse for satisfaction.
Yeah.
We're looking for our spouse for strength. We're looking for him for support financially. We're looking for him for that emotional support.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's almost super stressful too.
Yeah.
Because our husbands, our spouses, they cannot fulfill those in our lives. Only God can.
Yep.
And until we fully commit those things to him, we don't really know, we can't experience the freedom that it gives us to really surrender those things to him.
What is a specific way that you have idolized? Henry is her husband's name, but can you think of an example of like, in this way was really hard for me not to idolize him?
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with my God story.
Yeah.
But to try to have a family.
Yeah.
It was difficult for us, but I was looking to him. Like, he is the one that's going to give me a family. It's going to be him, and, we're going to do it together. So I was really, I feel like putting a lot of extra stress on our marriage in the early years of our marriage because, I wasn't putting it to God or giving it to God, if that makes sense. I was putting it on my husband.
So what was the breaking point? When or was it like that until you had kids, or was there a moment where you stopped turning to Henry and turned to God?
Well, and it is my God story. It is when, after I had experienced a miscarriage, when I fell on my knees and I was like, God, I can't do this alone anymore. And I had even isolated myself at that time. So, but it was until then that I really surrendered, I feel like, my whole life to God.
Oh, I love that. And I feel like I'm so glad you touched on that because I think that I feel like a lot of people struggle having kids. I even had a period of struggling having a kid. You did. It's so common. And I do think it's really easy to put the pressure on your spouse and idolize them and put them in the place where God only can be. And I feel like it probably started destroying your marriage a little bit.
Right. And I think it did more than I wanted to admit it at the time.
Yeah.
But now looking back, absolutely. I felt like it was something that it would have never been answered. Like my questions would have never been answered if I was always looking for Henry to answer them.
Yeah.
And I truly feel like I believe that I would maybe not have surrendered my life to Christ if they, if things went a different way, or if I really feel like it was the gateway to giving everything else up to him.
And I love that because all trials are good in Christ. Everything is to make us holy when we are in relationship with him. And even one of the harder parts of your life was one of the best things that ever happened because it led you to a true relationship with Jesus.
Absolutely. And I say time and time again that I would not do anything different. Yeah. I wouldn't want to change anything about what I had to experience to get to Christ and everything after. I wouldn't choose to do it differently.
Isn't that interesting? We never wish it on anyone.
Right.
But I wouldn't give it up for anything either.
Absolutely.
So how did Jesus model surrender?
Yeah. So my favorite point where I feel like Jesus surrenders is right before he was going to be crucified.
Yeah.
He had prayed to God 3 different times. He had prayed and he had asked God to take his cup of suffering. And every time he ended his prayer with, "Your will be done." So I feel like even knowing what he was about to experience, like the worst death, I feel like, on record, and I don't know if that's still the case, but absolutely knew what he was in for, and he still surrendered his will over what God wanted for his life. And he did it because he loved us. Like, how awesome is that?
How does that inspire your marriage?
I think well, obviously Jesus is perfect, right?
Yes.
So I feel like when you set the bar to him, that it's hard.
Yeah.
But I do feel like he gives you hope.
Yeah.
And that if he can do that for me and then everyone else too, I just feel like it just makes everything better.
Right. Isn't it interesting when we make marriage an idol? I feel like my marriage is worse. My parenting is worse. my friendships, like it just comes out sideways. Like when we put anything other than God on the place where God is meant to be number one in our life, like instead of making, I don't know what the lie is for you, but instead of making things better, ultimately it really makes a lot of my relationships in my life, but also with God, worse. Have you found that to be true too?
Yes, I completely agree. And I try to think back of things, different things in my life that I have, made idols. And, you think of kids, and I mean, there's a countless list of things that you do. And right, I mean, I'm not the person that I want to be in those moments at all. And I feel like ultimately what it does is it truly just hurts the people who are closest to you.
Yep.
Right? When you idolize anything other than God, you really do just end up hurting people. And, I know Pastor John jokes about it. Like, you never wake up, right, wanting to ruin his day. So, right, you don't ever wake up and want to ruin, especially the people you love the most, you never want to ruin their day. So I feel like it has the ability to do that.
Oh, absolutely. So what would you say to encourage a friend that is single and has a desire to be married?
I would say, I would ask him, how's your relationship with Jesus?
Yes.
And who is Jesus to you?
Absolutely.
And what does that look like in your daily life, right? I mean, I feel like it's, if you want a relationship to grow and you want to nourish a relationship, you don't talk once every, 2 or 3 weeks, or you don't just, I mean, it's a daily thing, right? I mean, if we truly want to be in a relationship with Jesus, especially if we're a newer Christian, but even when we're, a mature Christian, I feel like it's so important to truly be in that relationship with him daily, to really nourish that relationship in a way that it needs to thrive and needs to grow.
And I love that. And I think also if you can smash the idolatry of marriage before you get married, how much better off are you going to be? Because I feel like that is crucial. Because if you can have that smashed going into your marriage, it's going to be so much better for you. And it's going to be, I just feel like I see people who are living in idolatry in their marriage, they're putting their marriage with their spouse above the things of God. Like whether it's, we want time together so that I'm not going to read my Bible today, or I'm not going to go to church because we want to go on this trip. And not that those things, not that you can't go on trips with your spouse. That's wonderful. But and then I feel like it trickles to, I'm not going to point my spouse to Jesus, because if they are God, they are ultimate authority, and their say means more than God's. And it's the slow death of your spiritual life within your marriage when you make an idol. And then the thing that maybe was supposed to be the foundation, it's now cracking.
Absolutely. And I do feel like when you have God in your, I mean, not only is he who you find, who you write your identity in, but also if he's in your marriage, if he's like that third, wheel to your marriage, it can transform your marriage, and just beautiful fruit comes from that. Oh, yeah. So if you, like you said, if you can start your marriage off that way, just to see the work God can do in your life is just amazing.
Absolutely. Okay, so do you have a question for me?
Yes. So I want to know, what part of your marriage is the most difficult to surrender to?
Yeah.
And then how do you do that?
So many. Let's just start with it. It is a daily struggle, right? I think I crave John's approval. And I think that the greatest struggle for me is craving his approval more than God's approval. Because not only is he my husband, he's my pastor, he's my boss. And so it's like this trifecta of what he thinks of me matters. But it has been a daily dying to that. I don't need John's approval when I know that I'm doing the godly thing. But it's hard. It's hard. And he's a godly man. He is going to encourage the godly things that I do, but I want to go to God before I go to John. And that is the second question. The way I do that is if I am stressed, or if I sinned and I'm in my head about, did I screw that up? Or if I am questioning or wanting approval for something, instead of going to John and calling him or waiting for him to get home and unloading on him about it and wanting him to tell me I'm okay, I get on my knees and go to God first. And I don't do that perfectly either. But when I am being obedient, like I'm going to God and I'm confessing to him and I'm asking him to speak to me and point me to what I do next, because his approval matters most. And that is the only way in my life that I have practically been able to keep John off the pedestal, is seeking God first. Do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I feel like even if when you think that you have it right, probably getting on your knees and giving it to God as a habit is not a bad piece of advice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan.
Yes.
I just love what you had to share. And as we go, I want to challenge everyone, single, married, where are you idolizing marriage in your life? And how can you surrender more of it to Jesus? And I love what Megan said. Who is Jesus to you even? Like right now in your life, who is Jesus to you? And are you putting marriage before your relationship with him, whether single or married? And what can you do to either bring it down a shelf or really the ultimate goal, smash that idol so that God can be number one in your life? Thank you so much for joining us, and I cannot wait to catch you next time. Bye, Strong Roots.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Strong Roots podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure to check us out on all our other social media platforms. And I want to let you know that I am personally praying that your roots stay strong.